Hello again, and welcome to the topic two, which is religion and social change. And we're looking at lesson five. We're looking at religion and social change today. Okay. I say today, but this one I did a couple of years ago. So we can talk about it in different contexts and different ones there. We can use examples we've got here, or we can update them on this. This is the thing. This is one of those lessons where there's a lot going on in the world, and we can pick up on different things here. However, it's one of those ones where I could do a lesson and a thing about it today, and spend a lot of time doing it. But then by the time you guys see it, there's bigger issues in the world. So let's focus. Let's go forward on here. Okay. So the last point we kind of looked at was said by the Marxists that basically the Marxist approach was out of date. Um, and if this is true, um, and if so, what's going on? What is going on in the situation? Let's look at a couple of um, modern or recent situations by comparison to what's happened um, in the earlier stuff which we've been talking about. We're going to look at a little bit more recent. We're going to look at the Iranian Cultural Revolution, and we're going to talk about the election of Donald Trump, the first time, but also we might talk a little bit about the second time on there. So we'll also talk about the rise of ISIS, and the declaration of the caliphate and how that all ended horribly. But also, basically, at the time when I wrote this was the rise of ISIS was quite a big thing. So we're going to look at that as well. Okay. So, right, a little bit of history of Iran. Iran is quite an important political player, and it keeps on coming up as an issue and those things there. Now, early 1970s Iran was ruled by the Shah. Okay, now while the Shah was in power, Iran was controlled very much by a wealthy elite, and they had quite a liberal and tolerant um, attitude. So you wouldn't really have noticed much difference between the 1970s London and the 1970s Iran. Okay, that's the same sort of thing. So you could walk down the street in Iran, in Tehran, I believe it was, its capital, off the top of my head, and you would see the same mini skirts and all those things that were progressive, and the fashion and all those things there happening in there. It was a non-secular government. People were free to practice their faith as they chose. Mohammad Reza was also introduced, then what's known as the White Revolution. Now, the White Revolution was a series of economic and social and political reforms with the intention of transforming Iran into a global modernized nation, a global power and a modernized nation by nationalizing certain industries, granting women the vote. And during his 35-year rule in Iran, um, he spent billions on developing industry, education, health, armed forces. Actually, Iran would have one of the largest militaries in the world for a period of time. Um, and its economic growth actually exceeded the United States, England, and France. Its national income rose 423 times over. Huge. But by 1977, Iran's armed services were spending, actually made it the fifth strongest army, strongest military in the world. Yet the problem was that the elite were very much hoarding their power, their control over the country was very much limited to the ruling elite. We have and can see such things also in other Middle East nations still, but it was a real problem there. So it meant that although this country in theory was becoming incredibly wealthy, the population wasn't. The elite was, but the population was actually remaining very, very poor. And quite quickly, the idea that Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, um, was basically painted as the puppet of the West with the Western liberal moral ideas. He literally used to fly over and have a plane that would fly over to London to pick up whiskey. Yeah, and every week they were going and they were buying huge amounts of whiskey from London or from Scotland and bringing it back over to Iran, or really high quality. It was a massive thing there. And so this sort of incredibly separated situation was being made worse and worse and worse. The richer the wealthy elite got, and the poorer the major population remained, the greater the separation, the greater the conflict was there. And eventually, on the 11th of February in 1979, it led to the Iranian Revolution. Now, the thing is, the Iranian Revolution, um, like all revolutions, end up sort of rolling on a little bit longer than people think sometimes. And the people who come to power don't necessarily, well, they wouldn't necessarily be the people we choose sometimes in these things that come to power in them. We can talk about French Revolution, we can talk about a variety of others on there. But what happens ultimately as a result of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and it was an Islamic Revolution because it becomes an Islamic state. Okay, so um, we then start seeing it declaring war on its neighboring non-Islamic nations, so particularly Israel. And recently in the news, we had conflict again breaking out between the Iranian government and the Israeli. Partly, that is thought to be because the Iran government have been struggling. And so, how do you unite your population? You start wars. So they've done some provocative action, fired some missiles at Israel, and then Israel fired them back, and all those things there. And so it's a way of uniting your population, is to have a go at other people. And so, by having a war against those people who are non-Islamic, they were able to unite people under Islam and under the Iranian government. They imposed really strict laws. So Sharia law is imposed there. Some people from different communities would wish that to be the law imposed in maybe, but it does things like outlaw homosexuality. They also removed at the time female suffrage. So the women having a vote, that was removed. Female education removed. Female equality in the law removed. Um, so, i.e., women were now forced to leave the workforce. So, prompting the early retirement of female government employees, closing childcare centres, enforcing full Islamic coverage in offices and public places, as well as preventing the studying in over 140 fields of higher education. Also, they had to wear the veil, and there's huge human rights abuses for people, greater than that actually before. The population, the wider population, ended up suffering more under the new government who are trying to exert their control and their authority on there. And so what happened was this revolution set back the progress which had been made under the Shah. Now, can we think of an example where this has happened more recently, where the same setting back has happened more recently? Hopefully, you're saying Afghanistan. If you've not, well, you want to check out the current situation in Afghanistan. I'm sad to say that under the invasion and the war on terror that both Britain and America got involved in, we saw a asserting of a more liberal state in Afghanistan, in which women's rights were being respected and they could live separately. But with the final pulling out of troops under Joe Biden, we saw the Taliban, who were the people who previously had ruled in Afghanistan and were highly Islamic, and again they live under Sharia law. They initially went back in and claimed to be, oh, we're Taliban 2.0, we'll treat people well and those things there. You know what? Now, again, basically all women's rights have gone. Rights to education's gone. They are no longer able to work. They have to wear traditional dress. All those things, all those setbacks have happened there. So I'm sorry to say, but we've got Iran and Iran Revolution, which is pointed out in your textbook on those things there, but we could also use Afghanistan and pretty much be saying exactly the same thing on here, which, as I'm sure many of you will agree, being from a Western point of view and believing in liberal democracy on those things and accepting, your rights and freedoms, I think most of you will agree that actually the situation which has been imposed in Afghanistan and for the women of Afghanistan is awful, just as it was in Iran. Now, more recently, we have seen progress in Iran gradually happening, but then also crackdowns happening, and that's led to protests and civil unrest in Iran. And again, a couple of years ago, there was quite a lot of unrest on that. We thought it might be leading to an Israeli Irani revolution happening again, but it's not happened. It seems to have been suppressed at the moment. But there's a lot of suppression, there's a lot of repression going on. But also, that's part of why Iran fired missiles at Israel again to try and reunite Iran in that way and try and legitimize the strict rules of the Revolutionary Guard, as they call themselves, which is the governmental forces in Iran. So yeah, when we look at this, oh look, Bruce comes back up. Bruce points out that religion can be a source for social change, yet that social change may be progressive or regressive. And so we can use the example of Iran and the Iranian Revolution as a example of regressive social change, just as we can use the example, sadly, of Afghanistan following the exit of American and British troops. We can say that's an example of a regressive regressive impact of religion in that country at that time. Tragically for the poor people who are living there and the poor women who are being treated this way. So um, Bruce is recognizing the connection with the civil rights movement, that also helped society move forward and progress. But he points out things like the Iranian Revolution as an example that a regime that comes in can be regressive and impacting the freedoms and equalities which had existed prior to them. So Bruce is pointing out that actually it's not just necessarily that religion is a conservative force. It's not necessarily a force that can bring about change in a positive way. It's also a force that can bring about regressive change. Um, So I did this slide a few years ago, and that's why you got a slightly younger looking, although still orange, Donald Trump. And I wonder what Bruce is thinking about Donald Trump and the whole idea about abortion and all things. I bet he's also saying that Donald Trump is also regressive in those things. There, I would argue that that's probably where Bruce is thinking. Anyway, so the election of Donald Trump to the role of president. Well, first of all, who is he? Well, he's the rich son of a white Christian American family, and that is relevant because, again, when we talk about the new Christian right, we can kind of see that actually quite a few people kind of connect up with that and support him. So he's been a property developer, though he's gone bust before, financially being bankrupt on there. But he he's got a checkered past in his business career, on the ethics scandals and those things there. So he's owned the brand Miss Universe, which again we think is quite misogynistic and outdated as a thing. He owned that until 2015 when they got him to actually finally sell that on. He didn't stop it, didn't cancel it, didn't close it. He sold it on to make money. His views are what's called popularist. Basically, he says what the majority that he's speaking to are going to want to hear. And he speaks really quite emotively. His points are often emotive, rather than backed up by facts and stats and statistics and all those things there. Instead, he is talking very much a populist point of view. From all his trade policies, which we've seen in his second term, we can say he's very protectionist. He is trying to make things better for Americans and those things there, and he believes in putting in tariffs, which those tariffs haven't been in place there. He also, we can see this from the way in which he's been about NATO and all those things there. He's isolationist. He believes an America can look after itself. Thank you very much. And the first time he was in power, he tried to move America out of NATO completely. Didn't manage that. However, he still believes that he's a Republican, so he's a right-wing conservative party, which again that connected up with the new Christian right. So he's right-wing Christian, connected there. He's nationalist, so he believes in America being a great nation. It's a great place, great nation, and he wants to make America great again. But he's also a Christian, and he's also very much a capitalist. Okay. So his campaign slogans are what was his intent? Well, first time he was getting elected, it was "Make America Great Again" and "Build a Wall." They were his most famous slogans and most used slogans. "Making America Great Again" refers to taking it back to its 1950s economy, where things were simpler, better time economically, which following World War II, basically everywhere else had its industrial centers completely destroyed, but America was all right. So America started knocking out cars and those things there and selling them to the rest of the world. So people were buying those things there, and Detroit became massively powerful, and the car industry, all that, massively powerful. But then basically they didn't keep up with technology, and the Japanese were able to undercut them, and it all fell down. And so he talks about getting back towards good old American values, and again that is quite Christian as well, influenced very much by the Christian values which he comes from, quite nationalist as well. So he's very much trying to stop people coming in to America that he doesn't feel is helpful on them. We can see those policies going through. So he's also made some really quite regressive policies, and he tends to swing towards the regressive people who want to take America back away from the liberal agenda that's gone through. Okay, so who's his supporters? Well, his main supporters have five key traits according to psychology today. That they did an analysis of the supporters, identifying 5 key traits of people who tend to support him. So first of all, they tend to be authoritarian, which they like a strong leader, and they tend to believe that whatever he's saying is right. Which, where we can see in his first term, he used the fake news thing to delegitimize the media, and now in his second term, basically the media is delegitimized. So anything he says he does, he does it until the point he wishes to, and then he denies he ever said it, denies he ever did it. All those things there. It was published as fake news, etc. And so he's authoritarian. He's got social dominance orientation. They like that. They want society to be a certain way. They tend to have quite a lot of prejudice. So again, against the other people in the um, world, so that they tend to believe very much Americans are the best on those things there, and they tend to dislike any ethnic groups that they're not from. Um, Lower levels of intergroup contact. Again, they're less likely to want to mix or mingle with people who are not from their ethnic group. Relative deprivation, also with the belief of entitlement. I think that's a really interesting point. Of all the others, I think it's a really interesting point. He's pitched it at the group of people in society who don't have much and believe they should have more. And he's then put all the blame onto certain groups. So he originally was connected with a few different things. So Bruce, writing prior to 2016 election, wrote that the Tea Party movement, which was a right-wing group with the Republican movement, was too far from the mainstream, as it aligned too much with the Christian right, having a very traditionalist, fundamentalist Christian views. And the previous president candidate going against Obama failed to win because of that. They're too far right wing aligned, but that helped and enabled Obama to win, partly due to the voters' rejection of this very religious force and the very regressive direction that this force had. Yet it may also again be Bruce judging this too soon, because following Obama and following him, we then see that actually there's the swing to Donald Trump and him winning the presidential election with his anti-abortion messages, his campaign, and using the fake news idea to discredit any story that painted him as not fitting with that. And actually, you know what? It fitted in very much with the new Christian right moral code. Okay, it indicates that Bruce may have been wrong about the new Christian right, having not been successful, because actually it seems that Donald Trump, particularly in the second time he's now in, actually it might be that the regressive social change is happening now with that. And the way I want to point it out particularly is with the repeal of the judgment, which there used to be a Roe versus Wade, I believe it was, in America, and the overturning of that in the courts meant that women do not necessarily have the right to have an abortion in America based upon that. And as such, there is now many states across the United States where a woman is no longer able to get a abortion because it's believed to be morally wrong, not because it's medically problematic. It's believed to be morally wrong, and as such, that's happened in a variety of states. And those states that have passed that tend to be ones which voted very strongly for Donald Trump the second time, and who have a quite high fundamentalist Christian population in that state who've been campaigning for that. So we can see actually that the new Christian right might not really have failed It might have just taken longer than Bruce allowed for on those. I bet Bruce would probably be rewriting that book now. Okay, let's move on then. We talked about the American situation, and we talked about Iran. Let's talk about one more. So, the rise of ISIS, or as it's known in the region, Daesh. Now, they're a militant extremist religious group. Um, what I like to do is I like to do a quick research project. Let's just spend like 10 minutes. You can use your phone on there, you can use all computers on there, research and report back what the objectives were of ISIS and Daesh, and what sort of things they did to try and bring back a different, more aggressive situation. Okay, have a look and report back. Okay, so what I want you to report back on then is that key beliefs, key actions. Um, why are there examples of religious groups who are seeking to bring about regressive social change? And why might moderate imams regard them as not true followers of the faith and thus not a religious force for regressive social change? Why might they do that? Okay, right. So key beliefs. So yeah, they believe the need to establish this Islamic homeland again in the region, and they were seeking to try and make sure that this is the case, and they kind of took the opportunity of instability in these regions of Syria and Iran. Sorry, not Iran. The areas connecting to that to establish and take over that areas the uh, of land and establish what they called their caliphate. Now, it would only last actually a couple of years, but if you remember hearing of Samina Begum, she was one of three British teenagers who went over and believing that she would be going to this Islamic paradise and taking part and living according to Islamic laws, all those things there. And so she went over to there and found a very different situation. But one of the things they did was women were not allowed to work. Again, they're forced to wear the full veils and to cover up, to act submissively to men, being, they can't leave the house unless they're being escorted by men, all those sort of things. We see all that, loads and loads of regressive things where women's rights and liberation is gone, plus forced religiosity. If you are not praying on a regular basis, if you're not following the extreme version of Islam, then you're likely to be dragged out into the street and shot. Um, and so that's a real issue. Now, moderate imams, and there are a lot more moderate imams than there are radical imams. Now, though moderate imams would argue that Islam is a peaceful faith in which at no point is it ever acceptable to take a life or to cause harm, and that women should be treated with respect and that they should be treasured and looked after, not subjugated and exploited as ISIS did. We can look at the story of Selena Begum, what happened to her, and the way that she ended up by age 16 having had, lost one child and having a child on there, ending up in a refugee camp, and that by age 18 she was trying to get out of the area on those things, but she'd been married off to a fighter, and she was forced into that situation according to her on there, and so moderate imams are going to argue that these are not people who are truly following the Islamic faith. And because they're not following the Islamic faith, they will argue that they are not a religious force for causing regressive social change. They'll argue they are an extremist group causing social change. So extremist fundamentalists, those are the ones causing change, not a religious group. The moderate majority of Islam is going to say that, just as the moderate majority of Christianity is going to view the new Christian right as an extreme view of Christianity. just as we're going to see the same in Buddhist culture or in Hindu culture with the Daxels in India. Many Hindus would not condone the violence done by the Daxels in there, or etc. etc. We've got loads of examples. I go across the world doing those, but we can see that basically the argument here is they're not really following the faith, they're extremists. Okay, Bruce, there's more to it. So that's our first title, the first one. To what extent is religion a catalyst for these examples? In society where religion affects social life, it follows, it's always a factor, but is it truly a cause? So in each of the ones we've looked at, factors such as racism, loss of jobs to overseas workers, inequalities in division of national resources, history of conflict and ethnic division are all present as well. This shows that it's merely one of many factors, and that it's at most serves to give a viewpoint on a platform for their activism not being the sole cause. Therefore, Bruce's assertions that is a major factor for regressive social change must be recognized as overestimating based upon the limited consideration of the available information. Basically, Bruce, there's more to it. Secondly, Bruce, it's just not big enough. Oh, sounds a bit, dodgy. What do we mean? To be effective force for social change takes the engagement of the majority in engaging in it. Yet many of these groups that we're talking about are minorities. And despite their notoriety, the number of people involved in such religious groups is relatively small in comparison to the secular community. So when we look at Europe and America, we now have the majority of people being non-religious in the population. And although we've mentioned about Trump, actually, he's come to power and gained those. And it kind of renders Bruce's point mute in that, simply put, our society is no longer dominated and governed by religious groups. And this means that we can suggest that this area or explanation is of little value going forward because we simply don't have sufficient weight of population who are religious enough anymore. So yeah, simply put, the amount of religious followers is frequently not big enough anymore to explain why society is changing the way it does now. So we can do this in the past, and Bruce might be explaining in the past, but what about now? Can Bruce and his theory explain it now? The argument is no. Okay, there are many other places in the world where there are more religious than the Western world. We could look at places in Thailand or in India, and we can argue that actually religiosity is still massively present in other areas of the world that aren't Western. That Bruce's like 95% of all sociologists over focuses on Western religiosity, and the focus on the Western world means that he fails to recognize that actually, according to global figures, Islam has actually increased its membership over the last 10 to 15 years, and that each year of the 10 to 15 years, the number of people who are Islamic has increased, and that's increased faster than the increment increasing the population purely by um, procreation. That's people converting to Islam. So more people are moving towards Islam on there. And we also see, similar with other cases in Hinduism and other religions around the world as well. Actually, in different areas of the world, we see greater religious conversion. Bruce looks at everything from the Western point of view, and he is, like most sociologists, considering secularization occurring and arguing that religion is becoming a weaker force. But that's not necessarily true for the rest of the world. So what does this mean? It means that the theories that we've had and the theories that we've got should only really be used to apply to the Western world. And that means we can't truly explain what's happening in all societies across the world. Therefore, the sociology that we've learnt, sociology we've developed, is limited to the societies it was developed in.